We hold nonfiction to a high standard, even higher than fiction in most ways. When we crack open a memoir or a work of nonfiction, there is an unspoken contract in place. These things happen, these people are real, this person actually said this thing. Nonfiction authors lie. Not all of the time, not maliciously, well, most of the time. But if you look at the average work of literary nonfiction in the way that a lawyer or a court reporter might, you'll start to notice the gaps, the reconstructions, the convenient narrative shapes, the scenes that are written as though the author was there, even though we know that they weren't. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the lies that nonfiction authors can and often do tell. Now here's what I find really interesting about this. Those lies that are mentioned are the things that often make a piece of nonfiction great, because there's a meaningful difference between being factually accurate and being truthful. Those two things aren't the same, and one of them lends themselves better to great storytelling, and I believe that that is the most important role of a writer. So let's look at a few specific liberties that nonfiction writers take, and why in most cases those liberties are not just forgivable, but essential. Now that I've got this metaphor of a court reporter in my head, let's follow it down the rabbit hole a little bit. A court reporter and a writer both put words down on a page, but their jobs are completely different. A court reporter's job is to record exactly what was said, verbatim, without interpretation. The record must be accurate for legal purposes. This is he said, she said, without editorializing, without shaping, without any decisions about what is important and what isn't relevant. A writer's job is to interpret, is to look at the facts and events and not just convey what happened, but try to figure out what it meant, and meaning, inevitably, requires choices. Let's look at two accounts of a car accident. One is a police report that focuses on time, location, vehicles involved, potential contributing factors to the accident. The other is written by someone in the passenger seat who wants you to know exactly what it felt like to be in the accident at the moment and how they felt directly in the aftermath. The best nonfiction operates at that second register, and to get there, writers are allowed, sometimes required, to take liberties that a court reporter could never. And here's how that works in practice. A human life contains millions of moments. A memoir might cover a year, a decade, or an entire childhood, and at most it may contain about 100 scenes, which means that the authors had to make thousands of decisions, whether consciously or not, about what to leave out. If you're writing a history book about the Battle of Gettysburg, there's even more decisions to make, or you'll find yourself 1,000 pages deep and Robert E. Lee hasn't even had his morning cup of coffee because you spent time talking about how every single soldier woke up that morning. Crafting nonfiction is an act of selection, and selection is all about interpretation. Before they start the draft, the author will already know what story they want to tell, what shape they want to give that raw material of the events, and they will choose the scenes that will best serve that shape and story. Everything else must stay in the research docket, and the readers will be none the wiser. Memoir operates a little bit differently because ideally the memoirist was there, but the selectivity is still as profound. Every memoirist is choosing on every single page what version of their life that they're going to show you, which relationships, which versions of themselves. A skilled writer can hide their ulterior motives for crafting a memoir, whether that's for public relations reasons or for creating a legacy to leave behind, one that they're happy with. Anyway, the nature of stories is that they have to be shaped. They need a beginning, a middle, and an end. And life, as you may have noticed, doesn't really come with neat beginnings and endings. Even moments of stranger than fiction serendipity have to be slotted into a context in order for it to land. So the question isn't whether nonfiction authors are selective. They are. The question is whether these selections serve to illuminate the truth, or whether it distorts it for less honest reasons. If you're finding this useful, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to this channel. You'll hear people talk about how great non-fiction books read just like novels. And there's a reason for that. All books at their core need to be entertaining. Maybe not entertaining, but captivating. Something's got to pull them through and make them want to keep turning the pages. And very often, the best way to do that is to invite your reader and put them in the room where everything happened. And for that to work when you're an author without access to camcorder footage, is to invent scenes that closely approximate what you think would have happened. Sebastian Junger's The Perfect Storm is an extreme illustration of this. You may remember the film with George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg, I certainly do. Anyway, Junger's book follows the crew of the Andrea Gale, a fishing boat that sank in the North Atlantic during the titular catastrophic storm in 1991. There were no survivors, which means that every single scene on that book, every conversation, every decision, every moment of doubt or salty joke that was cracked on deck was something that Junger had to reconstruct. He interviewed family members, Coast Guard officers, meteorologists and fishermen who had been in similar situations. He even consulted scientific research to find out what it would be like to drown, and from all of that, he put together a story. Now, he was transparent about his methods. There's an author's note explaining how he did it, what he knew and what he didn't, and readers accepted it because they understood the implicit contract. This is not a transcript. This is the truest account we can provide, given the constraints. Okay, this one is one level down. So a scene may have actually happened in real life, but how does the author know exactly what was said at that moment? When you read a memoir or a work of narrative non-fiction and someone actually says something in quotation marks, how do you think it got there? Unless the author had a microphone running at all times during interviews, they probably didn't come from a transcript. What they have are notes, maybe recordings if they're lucky, and memory. And from there, they reconstruct. They write dialogue that captures the spirit and character of what was probably said at the time, even though the actual words are lost in the sands of time. The gold standard example of this is Truman Capote. Capote is one of the great American writers, someone who I was fascinated with in my early 20s. He worked in fiction, memoir, and journalism, but I know him best for three things. He wrote the novella Breakfast at Tiffany's, which is not relevant to this part here. Secondly, he wrote In Cold Blood, a 1966 true crime account of a murder of a family in rural Kansas. It's widely considered one of the foundational texts of literary nonfiction. And the last is his celebrity journalism, long intimate profiles with stars like Marlon Brando and Marilyn Monroe, and later on his withering exposés of high society women. The writing of In Cold Blood involved years and years of research. Capote embedded himself in the Kansas community, he visited the killers on death row, conducted hundreds of interviews, and the resulting book reads like a novel, but with real people and real dialogue, though reconstructed. Capote was famously particular about his interview methods. He never used a recording device, he never took down notes on the grounds that it would make his subjects uncomfortable and change what they were willing to say. As the legend goes, he trained himself to memorize conversations at length, which he would then transcribe later from memory. When I was a younger man, I was completely taken by this. What a wonderful skill to have. Only in recent years have I come to realize that this is probably BS. I'm meant to believe that a functioning alcoholic had the ability to remember hours of conversation and record them later verbatim. Perhaps he felt the need to convince readers that everything he wrote was factual. But in hindsight, I don't think it really mattered to readers that what he wrote wasn't a documentary account of what was said, because they seemed to capture a truth that resonated with readers. The extended conversations I mentioned with Marlon Brando and Marilyn Monroe that center on the kinds of exchanges that feel impossibly specific and intimate. Those couldn't have been captured verbatim, but they feel true. They feel like Brando and Monroe because Capote was a perceptive enough observer to be able to capture the essence of how they spoke and thought, even if the exact words were his. He was able to take these stars that everyone knew from tabloids and their roles on the big screen and imbue them with some sort of nuance that brought them to life. As with recreating scenes, there is a working standard of sorts with reconstructed dialogue. This is what I believe was said to the best of my ability to reconstruct it, and it's consistent with how I know how these people express themselves. And that is considered absolutely acceptable by readers, by editors, by publishers, by the industry at large. But what if you were actually there to witness everything that happened in your book? Are you then held to a higher standard? Memory isn't a recording device. Whenever you remember an experience, your eyes don't roll into the back of your heads as you play out the scene exactly as it happened. Psychologists have established fairly definitively that memory is reconstructive rather than reproductive. We don't play back events like in a video file, we rebuild them every time we access them. And in doing so, we fill in gaps, we incorporate things that we've since learned, and we unconsciously edit things in the direction of our preferred self-image, whether that is one's high esteem of oneself or one's self-loathing perhaps. The memory you have of something that happened 20 years ago has incrementally changed, like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Now this obviously creates a problem if you're trying to write a memoir. First-time memoirists are often concerned about misrepresenting the facts and the consequences of that. Like, will the entire thing start tumbling down like a house of cards because I forgot that I didn't break my arm on my 9th birthday, but at summer camp? If that sounds familiar, then you must remember this. When you're writing a memoir, you make yet another one of these pacts. This is the truth as I remember it. Again, this isn't facts, this isn't the court report, this is the truth as you remember it best in good faith. Tara Westover's memoir, Educated, was published in 2018. It's a memoir about growing up in a survivalist family in rural Idaho. She was homeschooled, cut off from the world, and shaped by a father that she later believed may have had some undiagnosed mental health issues. It's an extraordinary book, but it's also one that has been heavily contested by members of her own family who dispute key events and characterizations within the book. Westover addresses this directly in the endnotes and footnotes of the book. She acknowledges that her siblings remember their childhood differently, and how she struggled with the importance of small details while remaining confident that it didn't really affect the big picture. But she went and wrote and published a book anyway, not because she's 100% confident that she got every single detail right, but because she's telling the truth of her experience, what it felt like at the time, what she came to understand by it, and how that understanding changed with the writing of the book and in discussing it with her siblings. The truth as I remember it is not a cop-out. It's an honest acknowledgement that a memoir isn't a legal document. It's an honest attempt to convey a lived experience as faithfully as possible, using that least reliable of recording instruments, the brain. But where this tips into dishonesty can get you into some murky waters, as illustrated by a recent case. Raina Wynn's The Salt Path was also published in 2018, and it's a memoir about a walk she and her husband Moth took down the 630-mile southwest coast path. The couple went on this walk after they had lost their home and Moth had received a diagnosis of a terminal neurological condition with no known cure. It became a hugely beloved bestseller and was recently adapted into a film with Scully of The X-Files playing the author, and readers all over the UK and around the world found it deeply moving, in some cases in life-changing ways. However, readers with a medical background were a little bit skeptical about certain details, specifically the fact that Moth, who had been diagnosed with this degenerative neurological condition, seemed to improve significantly over the course of the walk. Medical professionals were quick to point out that this was, at a minimum, highly unusual. But most readers were happy to give this a pass, because even if the medical specifics strained credulity, the emotional truth felt real and resonant. We as humans want to believe that walking and finding purpose and immersing yourself in nature could do something remarkable for a dying man. That's the kind of truth that readers want to believe in. And Wynne, with her remarkable storytelling, had gained enough trust to pull her readers through. But then, there was an investigation published in 2025 by the Observer newspaper which raised far more fundamental questions about the very premise of the book. The Salt Path presented the couple's loss of their home as a result of a trusted friend's failed business investment, an act of bad luck and betrayal that set the entire journey in motion. But the investigation alleged that Wynne had misrepresented the events that led to the loss of their home. It also emerged that the couple had owned a property in France during the period described. Wynne, of course, has contested the allegations, but the whole debacle has sent ripples across the publishing industry. But I think the difference between this and Tara Westover's contested memories are really important to distinguish between. Westover's disputes are about the texture and the details of her childhood, events that are hard to verify, filtered through childhood memories, which are notoriously unreliable. The Salt Path allegations go to the very heart of the book's premise, the circumstances that made the walk necessary in the first place. They were broke, they were homeless, and her husband was going to die. If the reason that you set out on this 630-mile walk isn't what you said it was, then you've undermined the foundational contract of your book. Wynne's story tells us a lot about the great power of storytelling. And with that great power comes great responsibility. The responsibility to know when you can fudge the facts and when you're crossing the line. If you're writing memoir or non-fiction, this is worth sitting with. You have real obligations to the people you're writing about, to the events you're describing, to the readers who are trusting you to take them on this journey, who trust you to be honest about what you know and what you're inferring. But as we said, within those obligations there is an incredible amount of latitude. If you're working on a memoir or a non-fiction book and you're trying to figure out how to handle all the complicated stuff, the scenes you weren't present for, the dialogue you only half remember, it could be helpful to have an experienced eye. Here at Reedsy, we have over 2,400 experienced editors and book coaches, many of whom have experience in exactly the sort of thing we're talking about right here. If you haven't already, sign up for your free account and meet them today. Remember to like this video and smash the subscribe button. I've been Martin from Reedsy, and I'll see you on the shelves.